Hello and welcome to the special year-end episode of Bring It In, where we meet every week to talk sports and culture. This week I'm discussing the Olympics and whether they'll take place with fans. We're talking Tiger and Charlie Woods. We're also talking the future of athlete activism, but I'm not doing it by myself. I'm doing it with the best panel in this business. First, we have from Washington, D.C., the sports editor of The Nation and the author of 10 books with an 11th on the way, Dave Zirin.
Hello, hello. Happy holidays to you and yours.
Yes. And also in Washington, D.C., but born and raised in Hamilton, Ontario. Last week, we were calling her One Leg Meg. We just learned that she is an expert in budget skincare. Meghan McPeak, say hello.
Hello, hello. Happy holidays, everybody.
Now, obviously, 2020 has been a year unlike any other year. Between athlete activism, the pandemic, this disruption in sports schedules, and athletes flexing their off-the-field muscles. We've seen a lot of things we wouldn't normally see. But I want to start this discussion, guys, with just your appreciation of the biggest thing that you've seen on the field this year. Like, what stands out for you? Before we get into the off-the-field discussions, what stands out for you, Meghan, as a 2020 on-the-field achievement?
So I'm going to, bring it into the Canadians. Jamal Murray in the bubble NBA playoffs, and he had two 50-point performances and a 42-point performance. The only other person to do that at that point in the juncture in the postseason, none other than Michael Jordan. To have a 3 or more games of 50 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists. And that was not only a performance, but it was also in a situation where he was down 3-1 in the series. And that 50-point performance that everybody remembers, because for some reason we forgot about the first one, was to clinch Game 6, send it to a Game 7 against the Utah Jazz. And I know you said before we get to the activism, but for me, it was also the moment after the game with TNT's Jared Greenberg in that interview that we saw him. And you can hear my voice getting shaky because this moment was so poignant, not only for him, but in this time, as you said. And it was his sheer emotion when he was talking about not just the performance he had, but had nothing to do with it. He had his Adidas shoes donning one of the portrait of George Floyd and one a portrait of Breonna Taylor. And he was overcome with emotion, just speaking to the importance of his shoes and what they meant for him. And in that, walk-off interview, he said a couple things that really, really stood out to me. One was, these shoes mean a lot. And he repeated that a couple times while pausing, because he was overcome, obviously, with emotions, but as well too being tired from playing. And then at the end, he was asked another one, why is this so personal to you? And he said, and I quote, "It happens everywhere in regards to racism. It's not just a United States of America thing. Even though these people are gone, they give me life. They give me a moment to find strength to keep fighting in this world." So for me, it was a double performance from Jamal Murray, putting his emotions on his sleeve in that moment with Jared Greenberg, but as well to staving off elimination to force an ultimate Game 7 in that series against Utah. So for me, it's Jamal Murray.
And it's easy to forget because the NBA postseason dragged on so long, and we've lost so much of our sense of time during this pandemic, like how emotionally and politically charged those early stages of the NBA playoffs were. And in everything that's happened in 2020, it's easy to forget Jamal Murray's virtuosity, but I'm glad you reminded us of it. Favorite on the field performance.
Morgan, sorry, that was also too the same week that Jacob Blake was shot in Kenosha, Wisconsin.
Yes.
So the emotions were they were bubbling at the surface. So we forget about that, as you said.
Okay, so yeah, well, and it's natural. It's hard to keep track of things this year. Dave, for you, what's your favorite on the field performance?
We're talking on the field. I don't see how we choose anything other than Lamar Jackson against the Cleveland Browns. Whatever he had going on, and I'm going to respect his privacy, coming back on 4th and 5, season on the line, throwing a bomb, of all things, to Marquise Brown, the man with the buttered fingers. I mean, cinematic in so many respects. If he misses that pass, Lamar Jackson, forever, he's going to be the person who cost the Baltimore Ravens the 2020 season because of mud butt. And that's something that you cannot say about any other player. Who else has had to confront something like that and then come out the way he did? And second of all, if Marquise Brown drops that pass after dropping passes throughout the game, he doesn't even get on the bus coming back to Baltimore. I mean, it was such a fraught moment on so many levels. And I mean, in that stadium, I mean, reminding us of how sports can actually be beyond cinematic. I mean, there is no movie producer that could come up with a story as good as what we saw in Cleveland last week. So I give it to Lamar Jackson, absolutely clearing every possible hurdle and reminding us that he is the true Superman of the National Football League.
Also, that gets a...
Exactly. Now, for me, my favorite on-field performer of the year is a guy named Joshua Cheptegei, who a lot of you guys might not know about because he's a 5 and 10K runner. But because it's a CBC and we're the Olympic broadcaster in Canada, there are some folks tuning into this and say, yes, glad finally, Morgan, you gave some love to the distance runner. Because the thing about Joshua Cheptegei, in the space of 12 months, before the pandemic and during the pandemic, this guy set 3 world records that will... And he set one right before the pandemic. And then 2020, he set the world record for 5 kilometers on the road, ran 12 minutes, 51 seconds. Summertime in Monaco, he set the world record for 5 kilometers on the track. He ran 12 minutes and I want to say 35 seconds. A couple months later, he set the world record for 10 kilometers on the track, 26 minutes, 11 seconds, which makes him literally twice as fast as like actual in shape people as they run around. And I know a lot of the track and field purists kind of complain about the 2 track world records because they had pacemakers in the race, yes, and then they had like a video lighting system. So the lights would just light up at world record pace. So then all Joshua Cheptegei had to do was follow the lights. But to me, that's part of what's fascinating, because what really intrigues me about that level of sport is like the narrowness of the margins for error and how changing like one little variable just brings another set of performers to the forefront. So if it's a slow tactical race or a fast tactical race, maybe Joshua Cheptegei doesn't win. But in the sense of following the lights, he's the best guy at that. And so I am absolutely intrigued, and I would love to see more races when the sports world returns to normalish, where you tweak a variable here and a variable there just to see who excels. And what it also tells you is that when we talk about like the mental strain of performing at that level, the world record pace lights take the burden off the athlete in terms of thinking about how fast he or she has to run. And so you get to see now, like unburdened by that level of thought, what can your body achieve? And so to me, so for him to do that 3 times in one calendar year amid a pandemic is absolutely astounding. And it's also a testament to the greatness of Kenenisa Bekele, whose 5 and 10K world records Joshua Cheptegei broke. And it didn't just take 15 years for someone to come along and break these records. It took 15 years, new magic shoes, pacemakers, and a lighting system to break Kenenisa Bekele's world record. So for me, I just appreciate the performance and the moment and being able to do that again amidst a global pandemic. As we've seen sports return, we've seen a mix of empty stadiums, partially empty stadiums, in-person attendance, virtual attendance, and in places like New Zealand, where life is back to normal, we've seen people in the stadiums. But here in North America, we're still gonna have to wait a while for that. So my question to you, starting with Dave, is to what extent is this virtual fan experience something we're just going to have with us for the long term?
Well, I think we're definitely going to have it for the at least short, long term, if you will. But I have to be honest with you. I'm not numb to this. I'm not just used to it. I'm awed by the virtual fan experience. And I want to explain why. I feel like what these players have done they've exceeded all expectations in terms of the intensity they've put on the court or on the field, in terms of the emotion that they've put on the court and on the field. And that's what makes it matter, what the players put in. My fear when all of this pandemic sports scene started, with the bubble and the WNBA and the NBA, my big fear was that it would look like a glorified Y pickup game, that we would all be ending. And if you were a real hoops fan, maybe you dig it. But otherwise, it would look like, a top flight NBA or WNBA practice, which are fun to watch. I've watched them before, but it's certainly not the same as game time. And instead we've seen, I just think the level of professionalism and care has been so high. I'm frankly in awe of it. I'm in awe of, I'll tell you where it really flipped for me, the switch flip, was when Luka Doncic hit that fall away 3-pointer for the victory. And I just we jumped off our sofa in my house and we're just like, whoa. And it was like, well, wait a minute. All of a sudden, it doesn't necessarily matter that the fans aren't there in person. What matters is that the players feel it. And because the players feel it, we feel it. And I've talked to players, as I'm sure you both have, who've said, yeah, we miss the fans. Yeah, that gets us going. Yeah, that gives us 10, 15, 20% more energy. I had one NBA player said to me, I feel like I've lost 5 inches on my vertical just because the fans aren't there. Whatever. The point is they are putting their hearts into the product. And I feel that through my television set. And that has been, to me, the most welcome surprise in the sports world of 2020.
So Dave, was that player somebody with a vertical leap that was either high enough or low enough that he's not going to miss the 5 inches? Because if you're Zion, you can go from 48 to 43 and you're still dunking on people. If you're Marc Gasol, you can go from 17 to 12 and your game doesn't change. But if you're in the middle somewhere, you're going to miss those 5 inches.
Let's just say it's somebody who can do a little bit more than hurdle a magazine.
Perfect. So Meghan, do you see yourself ever returning to in-person sports attendance, or is it enough for you to pay $22 and get a cutout of yourself sent to the stadium so people can see you that way?
I mean, I eventually, once everything is safe and back to normal, I definitely will return to in-person attendance. It's a different feel and it's a different vibe because you get to see the the game day presentation that each arena puts on and each team puts on with, the dancers or cheerleaders, depending on which team it is. Some call them dancers, some call them cheerleaders. The in-arena games that they play when fans get to, partake in that. I imagine that something like that may change for the long haul. And that could be something that they completely change as to not having necessarily fans on the floor to do some of these games that we've seen in the past just for safety protocol. That could be something that they decide to take out. I don't know. That's just a thesis, hypothetical thought of mine that they remove. But for me, eventually I want to return to in-fan experiences. But, to Dave's point, the NBA, I think, nailed it when they brought in the virtual fans and what they did with it, because they made it feel like it was still, you were still there in some capacity, as social distance as you could be. And, to the point, these players have been playing, since they were little without fans or very minimal fans. You think the AAU circuit, before the internet and all these guys being on, YouTube and whatever with their games, it was just, mom, dad, auntie, grandma, grandpa, and, the rest of your team's families as well too. And then as well too, when you think about the fact they're playing at Pro-Am, before the Pro-Ams became a big thing, fans were not necessarily at them. So these players are used to playing with some fans, minimal fans, lots of fans. They just play the game. And that's, I think, the one thing I love about the game of basketball and sports in general is when you're by yourself, you think about every kid who has been on their, blacktop in their driveway with their net, they count down from 5. And you're most likely by yourself knocking down that game winner. So to do it with 20,000 fans is, you just get that moment. But I think these players have accepted it, and it's in their mind, like, I have to play at that level no matter what. But I know some players have said, they miss the fans. And I don't think there's a player in any league that will say they're happy the fans are not there. I think the only people that might be happy about it is the officials, because they don't have fans yelling at them 24/7 and they can hear what guys are actually saying now.
Yes, absolutely.
But at the end of the day, virtual, no fans, pumped in sound, whatever it may be that technology allows sports leagues to do, is never going to replace the in-fan experience for fans and for players.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems. One of the problems a lot of these teams are going to have to solve as they move back into something resembling a full schedule is, if they're concerned about making money, how do you make money on a half full stadium? Because we are a long way, maybe a season or two away from putting 20,000 people at Scotiabank Arena. And so you have to think about ways, and honestly, we might be moving into an era where 10,000 people in the arena max capacity is the norm and not the exception. And I think team owners, management are going to have to deal with that and find ways to replicate that type of atmosphere and entertainment value with fewer people. But the other lesson in this for me is the extent to which elite athletes like the ones we're talking about are competitive and internally motivated. So from here, from the outside, we talk about other factors making these guys play hard. Is the money going to make you play hard? Are the fans going to make you play hard? Is your teammate saying, hey, son, you better play hard? Is that going to make you play hard? And the answer most times is no. Like when you get that good and you're used to playing against people that good, you know how good you have to be to get to the league, stay in the league, and excel in the league. Like you don't do that unless that motivation is within you first. And the fans might help. But to Dave's point and to your point, like not having fans there does not reduce the intensity. It does not reduce LeBron James' desire to beat the Miami Heat. He was one of the first people at the beginning of the spring saying, I'm not sure if I want to play without fans. And what happened was you put that to the test, and it turned out it did not matter if there are no fans because LeBron James is still LeBron James and he's a competitor. And this is not the closest thing we can have to like a positive is that it did remind people of sport and motivation by kind of distilling this thing to its essence, which is my team versus your team, who's better. Meghan, you mentioned it before with Jamal Murray's post-game interview, that emotional, moving, stirring post-game interview that took place in the days after Jacob Blake was shot by a police officer in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And another ramification of that was that the Milwaukee Bucks walked off the job and triggered like a mass wildcat strike across sports leagues, really to call attention to police brutality. And not just that, but to have people who could do something about it. So my question to you, Meghan, is how do we get from those moments to a movement to something that sustains in 2021 and beyond?
I think it comes down to lawmakers. They're the ones that can ultimately make a change. And, you know, folks like you, Dave, myself, the players in NBA, WNBA, MLS, NFL, and MLB, and every other sports league around the world, and regular everyday citizens. I mean, at the end of the day, take away all of our job titles, whatever we do for work. At the end of the day, we are all citizens, whether it's United States, Canada, Belarus, Belgium, it does not matter. We are citizens of our country, and we can shout to the rooftops, from the rooftops to lawmakers to have change. But until something is followed through, what are we going to do? And I think at this point, we continue to talk, we continue to say what needs to be done. The onus is now on lawmakers and people that can actually make changes, whether it's in laws, in local, in federal, in the country, it does not matter. The onus is on them to now listen, hear your citizens, and then make a movement going forward to actually have sustainable change, because that's the big thing. You can have change for a day, a month, a year, but it needs to be sustainable long term. So I think at this point, the onus is on the lawmakers to actually make a change. And I credit the athletes across the board after the shooting of Jacob Blake that said enough is enough, because we went to the bubble and they all said it. We went to the bubble and we were concerned about not being heard, and they felt the best way to be heard was to not play. And George Hill was the spearhead for the Milwaukee Bucks and that moment, and that was a game 5. They were on the brink of eliminating the Orlando Magic in the playoffs. That could have cost them a series had when they returned it gone south. You never know what could have happened. They took a moment and they took a risk, and I credit them for doing that. And I also credit the WNBA players too, who have consistently been at the forefront of this conversation, going back at least to my recollection of 2016.
Right. And so, yeah, and that's a critical component, right? Is the idea that athletes put pressure on lawmakers and decision makers. But Dave, I don't know how sensitive Mitch McConnell is to what LeBron James thinks or what the Atlanta Dream thinks. So how can well-placed athletes continue to bridge that gap?
Well, first and foremost, I'm not sure that it's up to the athletes, but I'll get to that in a second. I think whether or not whether or not the summer's energy and momentum can continue in 2021 is frankly and bluntly up to the police of the United States, and whether or not they're going to get the message that extrajudicial killings have to stop, and whether or not the targeting of Black Americans, Brown Americans, people of color, whether or not that has to stop. And our police department's getting that message. As long as these killings take place, as long as these shootings take place, athletes, I believe, will step up and speak out, partly because the wine is out of the bottle. I mean, athletes are feeling their power. And so on the one hand, I don't think it's right to place a burden on athletes to do what citizens are not doing. And I always say that to people when they say, well, where are the athletes speaking out? My response is, well, where are you speaking out? And why would you ask of athletes what you don't ask of yourself? But at the same time, athletes, I really do feel, because of social media, because of the influence that they saw that they were able to have, are really feeling themselves and feeling a sense of power and strength. And that's not just going to dissipate. I think that we're actually into a new era. But whether or not they feel the need to flex in that new era is really going to be a question of how much injustice people in the United States are asked to swallow in the coming year. Because if the injustices continue, the athletes will continue to speak out.
All right, we have some time on the clock. Last in or out for 2020, hopefully the third in or out of many, many, many. But we put the topic out to the all-star panel, and they tell me whether they're in or out on this hot button issue. First up, baseball in Montreal. Tampa Bay Rays owner Stuart Sternberg tells the Tampa Bay Times that splitting seasons between Florida and Montreal is the, quote, only option once the team's lease at Tropicana Field runs out after the 2027 season. His quote, we're getting toward 2028 and you can't snap your fingers and just have the stadium show up. Meghan McPeak, are you in or out on baseball in Montreal in 2028?
I'm in. Why not? Let's give the Expo fans and baseball fans in Montreal some baseball, even if it is only part of the season. Why not? What do they have to lose? Give them some baseball. 2028, holla.
What about you, Dave?
Oh, I'm all in. I mean, growing up, people like Andre Dawson, Tim Raines, even Tim Wallach were like rock stars. So bring back that rock star feel that comes from Montreal baseball. I am all in.
I'm out on sharing teams. I'm in on Montreal with its own team. I am out on having the Tampa Bay Rays half the year. Yes, the Rays made the World Series this year, but we don't know what they're going to look like in 2028, because if there's any team that epitomizes like the boom bust cycle of baseball success, it's the Tampa Bay Rays. And I don't want Montreal to catch the Rays at the bottom of a cycle and only get them for half a season. And then when people don't show up for the games, then MLB has another excuse to say, well, I guess we don't have to come back to Montreal. Last month, IOC President Thomas Bach said he was hopeful that the 2020 Olympic Summer Games could take place in 2021 with spectators if a vaccine were available. Well, this month, several vaccines hit the scenes and several more might hit the scene next month. Dave Zirin, are you in or out on the 2020 Olympics in 2021 with spectators?
I'm out on with spectators just because the pace that we're seeing says that people are still going to be looking for vaccines come the summer months. And I'm not for organizing a super spreader event in Tokyo where people from all over the world will come to the beautiful city in Japan, but then return to their home countries. I just think that that is a recipe for disaster. It's hubris given the current moment. And I would like to see cooler heads prevail, although that's not going to be Thomas Bach. Hopefully it'll be health officials in Japan themselves, as well as health officials throughout the world that will just come forward and say this is not a good idea for 2021, no matter what date they put on the Olympics.
I'm out as well, especially when you think about the fact of super spreader events. And also, too, obviously, recently we've heard in the UK that they have found another strain, a mutating strain of COVID-19. So who knows where this virus could be going? Yes, there are vaccines rolling out. Yes, there could be more vaccines rolling out. But I'm with Dave. You don't want to have a super spreader event at a World Olympics in Tokyo, and then everybody then disperses back to their home countries and cities, especially too, a big thing of the Olympics is being able to see the athletes up close and personal. And I think there's too many risk factors. I am out on having fans at the 2020 in 21 Olympics.
Yeah, guys, I'm out on it too. Like, we just got finished talking about what is possible with the virtual fan experience. And we also just got finished discussing how internally motivated all of these elite athletes are. So Andre DeGrasse, Trayvon Bromell, Noah Lyles, they don't need fans to make them run 9.85. They will do it themselves once they get in the race. So we record on Monday mornings. This past weekend, Tiger Woods and his 11-year-old son, Charlie, played at a tournament in Orlando, a father-son tournament, making headlines and highlights even though they didn't win. Now, I'm no golf coach, but Charlie looked like he knew what he was doing. Dave Zirin, are you in or out on Charlie Woods' chances of winning more majors than his dad?
I'm in for Charlie Woods having the right of self-determination. Maybe little dude doesn't even want to play golf. And so putting these expectations on him when he might have, the dream to dance or to sing or to play music or, to sew, whatever he wants to do. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on Charlie Woods to follow in Pop's footsteps. Let Charlie roll with what Charlie wants to roll with. And you know what? If it's not golf, and this is just my own personal prejudices, I think it actually speaks very well for him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm gonna pick up that torch and run with it in a minute. But Megan, what do you think?
I am in on Charlie Woods, but I am out on society forcing him to play golf. To Dave's point, what if the kid wants to play hockey? What if he wants to play cricket? What if he doesn't want to play sports and golf is just his chance to bond with his father? And at the same time, I'm not shocked that he is, could be on a professional level with the way he plays. He has one of the best golfers as his coach. But you know what I am in on when it comes to Charlie Woods? I'm totally in on that if he does choose to play golf as a profession. Given the way that money in sports has evolved, I'm in on Charlie probably winning more money than his dad did. Maybe not necessarily majors, but probably more money. But I am just totally in on Charlie and his dad because at the end of the day, that is who Tiger Woods is to him. He is dad. I'm in on all the bonding that they do. If it happens to be on the golf course, I'm always going to be here for Tiger and Charlie in the Reds on Sunday.
I'm going to suppose that Charlie Woods still actually really has an authentic love for golf and plays because he wants to play. But we still should not place the expectation on him that he's going to approach Tiger Woods' success because Tiger Woods is one of, and I'm not a golf expert, but the list of Grand Slam winners or majors winners says that Tiger Woods is one of the top two of all time. It's unfair to measure anyone, even Tiger Woods' son, against that level of almost once in a lifetime success.
It is also true, Morgan. If anything is a precursor to future behavior, Michael Jordan's son was not as good as him.
Can you guys name for me someone who was the best in the world at a sport, and then their kid came along and was also the best in the world at that sport?
Yeah, Bronny James. No, I'm just kidding. But I will say that you talk about golf. It is true that there's never been a hobby that's paid as well as golf. Because, even talking about it as a sport is a stretch.
I'm on that, Dave. I'm out on golf as a sport, but go ahead.
I just believe that anything you can either gain weight or smoke cigarettes while doing it.
The NBA's regular season begins this week. I know that's going to make Meghan McPeak very happy. And the playoffs are scheduled to end in July. Just this weekend, the NHL released its own 2021 schedule, which will run from January to July, opening night to the end of the playoffs. Meghan McPeak, are you in or out on making these late start dates and late finishing dates a permanent feature of the NBA and the NHL?
I'm out. And for specifically when you think of Summer Olympics and NBA, WNBA, that it doesn't work because these players are going to have no time off. And that's an issue that every 4 years WNBA players have to deal with as well too. They get a 5 or 6 week break when it comes to the Olympics because basically every single player in the WNBA is either on a national team or because there's so many of them, they don't make the team, so they get the time off still. But they're in season when the Olympics happen. So I am out on these late starts because it affects players' decision. It could. I'm not making that assumption, but we could see some players elect not to play in the Olympics because they're making a run in the NBA playoffs. I know, obviously, with hockey, it doesn't. There's no overlap because Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics doesn't really matter to hockey. So I think hockey it could work, but for the NBA, WNBA, I don't think it works because it's too close to the Summer Olympics, as I said.
Perfect. Dave?
I'm out because I believe that sports are tied to the seasons, and we should strive for normalcy. And normalcy means baseball's your summer, basketball and hockey are into your fall, and football as well. I mean, I just think that this should be the goal. The goal should be to recalibrate sports to our calendar. And if we stray away from that, I'm just disturbed by what we'll lose.
Perfect. And point taken, Dave. Point taken, Meghan. I am all the way out on a late starting, late finishing NHL schedule. Call me the rare Canadian that has no desire to see hockey in July, but I don't want to see hockey in July. That's just me. Now, as far as the NBA is concerned, I like the late start only because Christmas Day is sort of the unofficial real kickoff of the NBA season anyway. That's the day that the NBA has to itself. And again, in a normal year, for so much of the fall and early winter, the NFL is just sucking up so much attention. And so Christmas and post-Christmas is when the NBA really gets to step to the forefront. I'm not so much concerned with NBA players playing in the Olympics, because the only other thing that happens every 4 years is that we complain about NBA players not wanting to play in the Olympics, even though they've played, especially the really good players have played deep into the playoffs. They've already played 100 games. They don't need 10, 12 more, or however many in the Olympics plus qualifying. They don't need a bunch more high-level, high-intensity games after they've had a full NBA season plus a postseason. So I'm actually in on a later starting NBA season. Give me NBA January to July, and I might actually watch more basketball. A big thank you to the sports editor of The Nation, and again, author of the forthcoming book, The Kaepernick Effect. Dave Zirin, thanks for doing this with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yes, and another big thank you to Hamilton's finest, Humber College's finest, a pioneering play-by-play voice on the basketball scene, Meghan McPeak. Thank you so much for being with us this year and hopefully into 2021.
Thank you for having me, Dave Morgan. Happy holidays to you and yours.
Yay.
After last summer's athlete activism, symbols of the fight against racism abound in myriad sports. Knee-taking and fist-raising before NBA games is now so widespread that it's become part of the spectacle, like the New Zealand All Blacks performing a haka. And we see slogans like "End Racism" stenciled into NFL end zones, or players with the names of Black victims of police shootings printed on the backs of their helmets. This season's embrace of Black activism marks a stark departure for a league whose previous attempt at fighting racism involved hiring Jay-Z as a consultant and promoting the self-consciously race-neutral slogan, "Inspire Change." But if you think the messaging rings hypocritical, you're not wrong. Between positive tests and contact tracing, COVID-19 sidelined all the Denver Broncos quarterbacks 3 weeks ago, and they had to field a practice squad wide receiver at starting quarterback. Yet somehow, NFL teams still can't seem to find Colin Kaepernick's phone number. Now, NFL team owners, let's remember, overwhelmingly support Donald Trump and other Republicans. According to OpenSecrets.org, 85% of the money donated by NFL team owners to political campaigns in 2020 went to Republican candidates. Even team owners in the comparatively progressive NBA give money to Republicans 53.4% of the time. Now, those numbers alone don't make team owners personally racist, but they certainly indicate a comfort with racism, and with a political party whose leader, Donald Trump, has a high-profile history of racist acts. In the 1990s, he campaigned for the execution of 5 Black and Latino teenagers wrongfully convicted of raping a white jogger in New York City's Central Park. This past year, instead of rejecting the endorsement of a white supremacist group, the Proud Boys, Trump told them to, quote, "stand back and stand by." And since the election, Trump's legal team has tried unsuccessfully to disqualify votes in places like Detroit and Atlanta, where NBA arenas served as polling places and where a critical mass of Black people voted for Joe Biden. We won't know until the next election cycle whether this past summer's activism and this fall's electoral result will prompt sports team owners who proclaim in public that they're committed to fighting racism to revisit their relationship with the Republican Party. Racism built into the structure of for-profit sports won't disappear in a week, or a season, or a year. It took until this autumn for the NFL to accept that the words "end racism" wouldn't trigger an exodus of longtime fans. And it might take another generation before NFL teams are as comfortable hiring Black head coaches as they are drafting Black defensive backs. This year has reminded us that phasing racism out of the sports industry and society isn't an event. It's a process, non-linear and littered with pitfalls and setbacks as well as success. So the activism driving it can take the form of big acts or a string of small acts forming an ongoing campaign. Either way, 2020 has taught us that athletes don't just intend to benefit from changing the sports industry's racist habits. Athlete activists also intend to drive that transformation. And that's a wrap for Bring It In 2020. Thanks to all of you for coming with us this far. We'll be back in 2021 with the same panel, Dave, Meghan, with new guests, new topics, new in or out. If you like what we're doing, hit the subscribe button, subscribe to CBC Sports YouTube channel. You can make us into a playlist. Hit like if you like what we're doing. Hit dislike if you don't like what we're doing, because all engagements matter. And leave us a comment. Until then, this is Morgan Campbell, and this has been Bring It In.